Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with pan sauce Bordelaise. That's right. Actually, that's not right. It's really more of a red wine meat scrap sauce, but you have to admit that really does not have the same ring to it. So we will go with pan sauce Bordelaise for the purpose of this demo. And of course, this is the companion sauce video for our soon-to-be famous Manhattan filet. And as we mentioned in that demo, the base of this delicious sauce is going to be those meat scraps we saved when we trimmed the steaks. So I'm going to unwrap my reclaimed New York strip scraps. And what we're going to want to do before we start the sauce is chop this up as fine as possible. Now, if you want to dirty your food processor, go ahead. Or your meat grinder, go ahead. But for me, I'm just going to take the old Chinese cleaver and chop this up real fine. So basically something that resembles a coarse ground hamburger. So that's looking good right about there. And at that point, we're going to stop and transfer that into a cold skillet, which we will then turn on to medium-high heat. And what we're going to do is brown this meat very, very thoroughly. Oh, we're talking full caramelization. And the reason I started in a cold pan is because I want some of that fat to render out slowly. So by the time this pan gets up to temperature, we got a little bit of fat built up in the bottom. And that, of course, is going to help the browning process. So basically, all we're going to do is saute this, stirring, breaking the pieces up as much as we can until it's nicely browned. And do I mean like that? No, it's getting close, but not quite. So let's keep going. And that's getting closer, but we could go a little more until it looks like that. And I know some of those pieces could go a little darker, but we're not done cooking because at this point, we're going to add some sliced shallot along with a little pinch of salt. And we're going to continue sauteing this until those shallots are golden brown. And I want you to keep an eye on your heat. If everything seems to be going fine, leave it on medium-high. But if it seems like the pan's getting a little too hot, go ahead and lower it to medium. That's you adjusting on the fly, also known as cooking. So we'll keep cooking that, stirring, until those shallots soften and caramelize and turn a beautiful golden brown. So once we have our meat and our shallots caramelized beautifully, we're going to go ahead and dump in some red wine. And then all we want to do is basically cook this until the wine pretty much evaporates. And don't walk away. That's going to happen pretty quickly. That UPS guy will come back. Don't worry. Stay by the stove, because in just a few minutes, that wine's going to reduce, and you're going to be able to see the bottom of the pan when you stir, although I still can see a good amount of liquid under there. So we're going to give this one more minute until we have this. You see that? We're stirring, and we really don't see any wine at the bottom of the pan. So that's perfect, and at that point, you're going to quickly add a couple cups of chicken broth. Unsalted, please. Or at the very least, low sodium. Because we're going to reduce this, we got to be careful of our salt content. So ideally, you're using homemade chicken broth here. But anyway, we're going to pour that in, give it a stir. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to bring this up to a simmer and then turn the heat to low. And then just let this cook for about an hour to an hour and a half. Now, of course, if you want, you could transfer this into a saucepan, which is a little easier to control. But I didn't want to dirty another pan, and I was going to be in the kitchen the whole time, so it didn't matter. And what we want to have happen is that all that flavor from those little caramelized bits of steak goes into this liquid, and that's what's going to make this finished sauce so delicious. So for me, after about an hour, 15 minutes of simmering on the back of the stove, this is what mine looked like. All right, the goal when we strain this is to have about a cup of product, okay, give or take. And then once that step has been completed, we're going to carefully strain this. And of course, make sure you press out every precious drop from those meat scraps. And once I was done straining, I had about 200 mil. Here, let me turn this around to a way more logical system of measurements. Oh yeah, there we go. It's almost 1 cup, almost 8 ounces. And by the way, I should mention this step can be done way ahead of time. And in fact, if you're not going to use this sauce right now, let it cool and leave that fat on the top. And that will turn solid as it cools and you'll have an airtight seal. But if you're ready to use it to sauce your steaks, then let's go ahead and remove the fat from the top. And as soon as that's done, we are ready to go. All we need now is somebody to cook a couple steaks. And as you may have already seen, I was that person. So there's my 2 beautiful Manhattan fillets. We've cooked them to perfection. And of course, we're going to remove those to a plate to rest, which of course leaves us with this, the saucier's best friend, a dirty pan. All right, so we're going to take our pan that has the fond on the bottom that formed when we cooked our steaks. We're going to go ahead and pour in our reduction. We're going to turn the heat up to medium-high. And of course, as this comes up to temperature, all those beautiful caramelized bits are going to dissolve off the bottom into our already flavorful liquid. And we'll do final seasoning later, but I'm going to put a little pinch of freshly ground black pepper and some salt in here now. And then all we need to do while our steaks rest is reduce this down until it thickens, which in a pan this size is not going to take very long. So in just a few minutes, this is what mine look like. So at this point, my sauce is just about where I want it. You can see it's thickened up beautifully. And it also has a beautiful shine to it, and we haven't even added the butter yet, which is the next step. So at this point, I want you to turn off the heat, and we're going to finish this in the classic pan sauce style with a chunk of butter. And once you toss that in, you want to keep it moving until it disappears. So we're going to whisk continually until that happens. And because of the acidity in that sauce, and the fact the sauce is hot and the butter's cold, that fat's going to emulsify into that mixture. It's going to give it even more body, of course flavor and richness, but it also gives it an incredibly gorgeous shine. I mean, if I had a comb or hair, I could totally comb my hair in that sauce. And then of course, because we're not terrible cooks, we're actually going to taste this and see if we need another pinch of salt or two. And once it tastes as good as it looks, we'll go ahead and spoon that around and possibly over a couple beautiful steaks. And that perfect pairing of seared beef and reclaimed meat scrap Bordelaise sauce is done. Just a really beautiful combination. We could just sear a couple steaks, deglaze the pan with plain red wine, reduce it and finish it with butter, and we would still have a great pan sauce. So you can imagine how much richer and more flavorful this is using those meat scraps. And I know, you already saw me cut up this steak and dip it in sauce in the last video, but I never get tired of watching pieces of meat get dragged through sauce. In fact, there should be a television network that's all they show. I mean, come on, there's a weather channel, and this is way more interesting than that. Alright? So if you do end up giving our Manhattan fillets a try, I really hope you save those scraps and give this a try too. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and way more info as usual. And as always, enjoy!